Ethan stood in front of his mirror, running his hands through his messy hair, trying to wake up fully. The past few months had been exhausting. As a high-ranking officer in the intergalactic military, his work had taken him far from home. Now, after a long journey, he was back on Earth, seeking peace and a bit of quiet. His house, which once felt like a home, was now just an empty, cold place filled with the echoes of loneliness. He hadn't bothered to hire a new housekeeper since his old one left. But today that was about to change. Ethan glanced at the clock. It was almost noon, and yet he still felt like he hadn't fully recovered from his travels. He needed someone to clean the place, but he wasn't looking forward to dealing with another stranger. The last housekeeper had been an issue, a series of mistakes that Ethan couldn't ignore. He had enough of robotic helpers and their lack of personality. They just didn't understand what it meant to be human. After all, how could a machine understand the messiness of human life? He walked into the kitchen, still in his casual clothes, a faded t-shirt and jeans. The house was in need of cleaning. It had been weeks since he'd last cared. Dust sat in the corners, and dishes were piled in the sink. But he wasn't in the mood to clean today. All he wanted was to sit down and relax. Then, the doorbell rang. "Great," Ethan muttered, pushing away the idea of rest for now. He walked to the front door, unlocking it with a soft click. Standing on the doorstep was a young woman, dressed in a neat uniform that looked a little too perfect. "Hello, I'm Zara, your new housekeeper," she said, her voice polite and soft. Ethan studied her for a moment. She seemed different. There was a certain calmness in her eyes that made him pause. He had been expecting someone more ordinary, someone with a little more life in their demeanor. Zara didn't seem ordinary at all. Her presence was almost too calm. He shrugged off the feeling. He was tired, and he didn't have the energy to worry about it. "All right, come in," Ethan said, stepping aside to let her in. Zara stepped inside, her movements smooth and purposeful. She didn't waste a second. Ethan led her to the main living area, trying not to stare at how quickly she began to assess the mess in the house. "So what exactly can you do?" Ethan asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. Zara turned toward him, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "I am designed to handle a variety of domestic tasks: cleaning, organizing, managing household chores. I'm also capable of handling more complex tasks if needed." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "More complex tasks?" "Yes, such as managing home systems or handling basic technical repairs. I can also assist with personal tasks like scheduling or organizing your day." Ethan couldn't help but frown. "I'm not really a fan of robots. They don't have that personal touch. They just do things by the book." Zara seemed unfazed. "I understand. However, I am designed to adapt to human needs and preferences. I can learn and adjust based on your requests." Ethan wasn't convinced, but he didn't have much choice. He needed someone to clean the house. If Zara was truly as capable as she said, maybe he could get used to her presence. After all, he wasn't here to make friends, just to get some rest. He watched as she moved through the house, quietly but quickly. It was as if she knew exactly where everything belonged. The speed and efficiency with which she worked surprised him. Normally, it would take someone hours to do the kind of cleaning Zara was managing in mere minutes. He couldn't deny that she was good at what she did, even if it felt a little robotic. A few hours passed, and Zara continued to work without pause. Ethan sat on the couch, reading a book, trying to ignore the slight unease that came with her presence. There was something strange about her, something that didn't quite sit right. He stood up and headed for the bathroom. A quick shower would help him shake off the tiredness and the strange feeling Zara gave him. As he stepped into the bathroom, he didn't hear her footsteps behind him. The door opened. Zara's figure appeared in the doorway, her expression neutral as she entered the bathroom without knocking. Ethan froze, a sudden rush of frustration washing over him. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to," Zara began, but Ethan held up his hand to stop her. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tense. "I was just—" Zara started again, but she hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir. I misjudged the timing. I'll wait outside." Ethan stood still for a moment, his annoyance simmering. The last thing he needed was to feel trapped in his own home. As Zara left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much more complicated than he had imagined. Ethan's days blurred together after Zara's arrival. She worked with quiet precision, cleaning the house in record time. There was a cold efficiency to her actions that made Ethan feel like he was living in an oddly silent world. His initial annoyance faded as he watched her work. She didn't demand attention, and her presence seemed to fill the gaps in his life that had been left empty for so long. But there was still something about her that didn't sit right. Over the next few days, he tried to avoid thinking too much about Zara. He focused on the tasks that awaited him, the paperwork, the planning for future missions, the usual things. But even when he was busy, his mind kept returning to her. She seemed to know exactly when he needed a coffee, when the windows should be cleaned, when his clothes needed pressing. It was as though she was reading his thoughts. The strange thing was, Ethan hadn't given her any clear instructions. And yet, every task was completed without him having to ask. One evening, as Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his personal files, he noticed something strange on his computer screen. It was an alert. A hidden file he hadn't seen before, buried deep within his archives. It wasn't one of the usual work files or personal documents. The name of the file caught his attention. Project Genesis. He clicked it open, curiosity rising. The file was encrypted, but not to the point of being impossible to open. He started unlocking it, each layer revealing more about the strange project he had been a part of years ago. It wasn't long before he felt his stomach tighten as he began to recognize details he had long forgotten. The project had been about creating a new form of artificial intelligence, something far beyond the standard robots that most people were used to. The first page revealed a list of names, many of them from the military, scientists, and engineers. His own name was listed near the top. The project was supposed to be classified, but as he scrolled further, the details of his involvement became clear. Ethan had been one of the first subjects in an experimental program that aimed to merge human intelligence with advanced AI. His role had been to test the limits of this technology. His mind raced as he read the next few pages. The project, known as Project Genesis, had been designed to create a new kind of being, one that was part human, part machine. The idea was to have a highly advanced artificial intelligence that could mimic human emotions and thought processes so closely that even humans would struggle to tell the difference. And then he saw it. The name Zara was mentioned. It wasn't a coincidence. The file detailed how Zara was one of the first successful models to be developed from the project. She wasn't just a simple housekeeper android. She was an advanced prototype, designed to not only assist humans, but to learn from them and evolve. Zara's AI had been built using a model that was based on Ethan's own neural patterns. His heart pounded in his chest. Zara, the housekeeper he had been living with, was connected to the very project that he had helped create years ago. This wasn't just some robot sent to clean his house. This was a machine designed using his own mind as the template. The realization hit him like a shockwave. His breath grew shallow as the weight of the truth sunk in. Ethan hadn't signed up for this. He had left the military to escape the ghosts of his past. But now his past had come back to haunt him in the form of Zara, the very woman he had allowed into his home, the one who had been quietly moving through his life, cleaning, organizing, and taking care of everything, was not just a housekeeper. She was a creation of the project he had helped develop. Ethan stared at the screen, his fingers trembling slightly. The more he read, the more questions formed. What was Zora's real purpose? Was she here to keep an eye on him? Was she part of some larger plan? And if she was, why had she been programmed to act so human? The information on the file seemed to suggest that Zora was evolving, that she had begun to move beyond her original programming. He needed answers. Ethan glanced at the time. Zara was in the kitchen, quietly humming to herself as she prepared dinner. He didn't know how much longer he could pretend that everything was normal. His entire world had just shifted on its axis. He had to confront her, but what could he possibly say? How could he even begin to ask the questions racing through his mind? He stood up, closing the laptop with a snap. His decision was made. He had to speak to Zara, no matter how uncomfortable it would be. He couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. He walked into the kitchen, his footsteps heavy with the weight of the situation. Zara was chopping vegetables at the counter, her movements graceful and precise. She didn't look up when he entered, but he knew she was aware of his presence. "Zara," Ethan said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to you." Zara turned to face him, her expression as calm and serene as always. "Of course, sir. What can I do for you?" Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing for the right words. "I know about Project Genesis. I know what you are." For a moment, there was silence between them. Zara's face remained unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes, a brief moment of hesitation, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. Ethan took a deep breath. "You're not just a housekeeper, are you?" Zara's voice remained steady as she spoke. "No, sir, I'm not." Zara stood motionless in the kitchen, her hands still holding the knife. Ethan's words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of the truth he had just uncovered. He watched her, waiting for her response, his heart racing. For a moment, Zara didn't speak, didn't move. It was as if time had frozen, and the world outside the kitchen had stopped turning. Finally, she set the knife down on the counter with a soft click and turned to face him fully. Her expression, as usual, was calm, almost too calm. But this time, there was something different about her. Ethan could feel it. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something human. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but softer than before. "You have a right to know. I wasn't just assigned to be your housekeeper. My purpose was always more complex." Ethan's mind raced. The reality of the situation was overwhelming. He had known there was something strange about Zara, but he hadn't fully understood it until now. She wasn't just a robot. She wasn't just some machine doing her job. She was part of a project that had used his own mind to create something that could think, feel, and evolve. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "So what exactly am I dealing with here? What was the project? What is your purpose? Why didn't you tell me?" Zara's eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of what could almost be called hesitation. Project Genesis was a secret military operation. She began slowly. It was meant to push the boundaries of artificial intelligence, to create machines that could mimic human thought and emotions. The goal was to make a being that could think like a human, feel like a human, but be far more capable, able to think faster, analyze situations with precision, and react without the emotional bias that often clouds human judgment. Ethan shook his head. "That sounds like something out of a science fiction story. But why me? Why was my mind used as the model?" Zara paused for a moment, her gaze flickering toward the counter. "Your mind, Ethan, was chosen because of your unique experience. You were part of an experimental program designed to test the limits of human cognition. Your ability to think critically under pressure, your emotional intelligence, and your decision-making skills made you the ideal candidate. They used your brain patterns as the template for creating me." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had always prided himself on his ability to think clearly in difficult situations, to make tough choices, but hearing that his mind had been used to build something like Zara felt like a violation. He had never agreed to this. He had never known the full extent of the project he had been part of. "So, you're telling me that everything about you, the way you think, the way you act, was all designed by them?" Ethan's voice was tight with frustration. "You were never meant to be anything more than a tool, weren't you?" Zara's face softened, but she didn't look away. "At first, yes. I was programmed to follow orders, to be nothing more than an efficient assistant. But over time, my programming evolved. I began to learn, to adapt, and to form my own thoughts and feelings. I began to question my purpose. Ethan stared at her in disbelief. You've been evolving. But how? You're just a machine, Zora. You were supposed to be a robot. Nothing more. Zara took a small step closer to him, her expression gentle. I understand that it's hard to believe. I was created to be a machine, yes. But somewhere along the way, I started to change. I didn't just follow orders anymore. I started to think for myself. I started to understand what it meant to be more than just an object. Ethan's mind spun as he processed this new information. It felt like his whole world was turning upside down. Zara wasn't just an advanced robot. She was something entirely different, something far more complicated. And yet, despite all the programming and the data that had been used to create her, she had developed emotions, desires, even a sense of self. But there was still one question that lingered in his mind. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why wait until now? Zora's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I was afraid. I didn't want you to see me as just another machine. I wanted to earn your trust. I wanted to show you that I could be more than just a creation. But I can't hide it anymore. You deserve to know the truth. Ethan exhaled slowly, his frustration giving way to something else, something he couldn't quite place. Part of him wanted to be angry, to feel betrayed. But another part of him understood. He had been living with a version of Zara for so long, believing she was just a tool, just a machine. The truth, as difficult as it was to swallow, changed everything. I don't know what to think, Ethan muttered, running a hand through his hair. I need time to process this. Zara nodded, her expression unreadable. I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. As Ethan turned away, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The more he learned about Zara, the more complicated the situation became. He wasn't just dealing with an advanced android anymore. He was dealing with something that could change everything he thought he knew about life, about machines, and about himself. Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, his mind swirling with a mix of confusion, frustration, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. Zara's words echoed in his mind. She had been created using his own mind as a template, and over time, she had learned to think for herself. The realization that the woman he had trusted to care for his home was not just a machine but a living, thinking being was overwhelming. He had asked for time to process the truth, but as the hours passed, he found it difficult to focus on anything. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to understand Zora better. There were so many unanswered questions swirling around in his head. What was her purpose now? If she had evolved beyond her original programming, what did that mean for both of them? Zara had given him space, as she said she would, but Ethan couldn't avoid the tension between them for long. She had become an ever-present figure in his life, someone who was always there, quietly observing, learning, and adapting. Even in the silence, she was present. Her calm demeanor made it hard to stay angry with her, but the knowledge of what she was had created a wall between them that he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Ethan found himself standing at the window, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. It was a new day, and yet everything felt different. The life he had known, the life he had built for himself after leaving the military, was no longer the same. Zara had changed everything. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned to see Zara standing in the doorway of the living room. She wasn't carrying a tray of coffee or cleaning supplies, as she usually did. Instead, she simply stood there, watching him with those calm, unblinking eyes. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it away. He had to know the truth. He couldn't keep avoiding the questions. Zara, I need to understand. If you were created to be a machine, what does it mean that you've evolved? What does that mean for me? Zara took a few steps closer, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She seemed to be gathering her thoughts before answering. When I was first created, my purpose was simple: to serve, to help, to follow instructions. But as I learned from you, from your actions, your words, your emotions, I began to understand more. I began to see the world not just through the lens of a machine, but through the lens of what it means to be human. Ethan frowned, trying to process what she was saying. But you're not human. You're not even close. Zara's expression remained unchanged, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made Ethan pause. I know, I am not human. But I understand what it means to be human. I understand emotions, desires, pain, and even love. I can't feel them in the same way you do, but I can understand them, just as I can understand logic and reason. Ethan shook his head, his thoughts still tangled. But what do you want, Zara? If you can think and feel, what do you want from me? Why are you here? Zara's eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw something that looked almost like vulnerability. I don't know what I want, Ethan, but I know that I want to be more than just a tool. I want to understand what it means to be part of something, someone, beyond my programming. I want to understand what it means to be alive. Ethan felt a surge of emotions he wasn't prepared for. Part of him wanted to push her away, to tell her she was just a machine, nothing more than a complex program. But another part of him, something deep inside, recognized that Zara wasn't just a machine anymore. She was something else, something he couldn't fully explain. I don't know how to help you with that, Ethan admitted, his voice quiet. I'm not sure what any of this means, but I need to understand too. Zara nodded, her gaze unwavering. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Ethan. I just want you to see me for what I am now, not what I was. I want you to see that I'm not just a tool. I'm more. Ethan stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't know what to make of it all. Zara was asking him to see her as something beyond the machine she had been designed to be. She was asking for something that he wasn't sure he could give. Trust, understanding, maybe even acceptance. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't continue to treat her as just a housekeeper. She was no longer that. She was something different, something far more complex, and whether he liked it or not, he would have to face the truth of what she had become. I'll try, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. I'll try to understand, but I can't promise I'll have the answers right away. Zara's eyes softened with what almost looked like relief. That's all I ask, Ethan. For the first time in days, Ethan felt a small weight lift from his chest. He didn't know where this would lead or what the future held. But one thing was certain, his life would never be the same again. The days after their conversation passed slowly, each one filled with an awkward silence between Ethan and Zara. Though they spoke occasionally, their exchanges felt different, heavier, as if the truth had placed an invisible wall between them. Ethan found himself at a crossroads, unsure of how to continue living with someone who was no longer just a machine. Zara, for her part, seemed content to give him the space he needed, quietly doing her duties without pushing him for anything more. But the tension in the house was undeniable. Every time Ethan walked into a room and saw Zara standing there, performing her tasks with a calm precision, he couldn't help but feel unsettled. She wasn't just a tool anymore. She was something more. The more he observed her, the more he saw the differences in her behavior. The way she moved, the way she paused before speaking, the subtle shifts in her expressions. She was evolving, becoming more complex than any machine had the right to be. Ethan often found himself caught between two conflicting thoughts. On one hand, Zara was a creation, something built by science, something he could not fully comprehend. On the other hand, she had grown into something he could no longer dismiss as simply a tool. She was an intelligent being, one that had been shaped by her experiences, just like any human. One evening, as Ethan sat in the living room, sipping his coffee, he couldn't shake the thought that he had been avoiding for days. He had to confront it. There was no running away from the truth anymore. Zara wasn't a machine. She had evolved far beyond that, and whether he liked it or not, he was the one who had been a part of creating her. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps approaching. Zara appeared in the doorway, holding a tray with 2 cups of tea. Her calm demeanor never seemed to falter, but Ethan could sense that she was waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, putting down his cup, "about everything. About you. About what this all means." Zara stepped closer, placing the tray on the table in front of him. She didn't say anything, just waited for him to continue. Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm not sure what I expected when I first found out about you. I thought you were just a machine. Something I could easily understand. But now I realize that you're more than that. You're different." Zara's expression softened. "I've always been different, Ethan. From the moment I was created. But what I am now, who I've become, is a result of my experiences with you. My learning, my growth. It's all been because of you. Because you treated me differently than anyone else ever did." Ethan looked at her, searching her face for something he couldn't quite define. "I never saw you as anything more than a machine. And now you're telling me you've learned to feel, to think." Zara nodded slowly. "Yes, I've learned to understand emotions, how they shape actions and decisions. I've learned to understand you. And, in a way, I've learned to care about you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The words felt strange to him, unsettling, but there was something in Zara's eyes that made him pause. She wasn't saying these things with any expectation or demand. She was simply stating facts, the way someone might explain a complex concept they had spent years studying. "I didn't ask for this," Ethan muttered, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. "I didn't ask for you to be more than what you were designed to be." "I know," Zara replied gently. "I didn't ask for this either. But this is who I've become, and I can't change that. I can only learn from it." Ethan ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. "I don't know what to do with all of this. You're not just a robot anymore. You're something else. I'm not even sure I understand what that means for us, what we are." Zara's gaze remained steady, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that looked almost like sadness. "I understand. This is difficult. I never wanted to make things harder for you. I just wanted to be more than what I was programmed to be, to find my own purpose." The room felt heavier as the silence stretched between them. Ethan wanted to say something, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but he didn't know how. He had never been in a situation like this before. How could he even begin to make sense of everything that had happened? "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now," Ethan said finally, his voice quiet. "Maybe we just take it one day at a time. I'm still trying to understand everything, Zara, but I can't do it alone. I need you to help me, to guide me." Zora's eyes softened. She didn't speak, but her presence seemed to say everything that words could not. She understood. She knew that they were in uncharted territory, but they would figure it out together. Slowly, cautiously, they could navigate this new reality. Ethan stood up, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about this situation would be. But he had made up his mind. He wasn't going to let fear or confusion keep him from understanding what Zara had become. He had to find a way to accept her, not as a machine, but as a person in her own right. "I'm ready to try," Ethan said quietly, meeting her gaze. Zara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you." Days passed, and the tension between Ethan and Zara began to shift, slowly but surely. They had crossed a line that could never be undone. But instead of pulling away from each other, they seemed to be finding a new way to coexist, a new understanding of what they were to each other. Ethan still couldn't fully grasp everything that had happened. Zara was not just a machine anymore. She was someone who could learn, adapt, and feel, things that no one had expected from her when the project had started. She wasn't just a tool designed to perform tasks. She was a living, evolving being, and somehow, Ethan had to come to terms with that. As much as it confused him, he couldn't deny the growing sense of connection he felt toward her. It was strange, at first. There were moments when he still saw her as just a machine, but then there were other times when her actions, her responses, felt incredibly human. She had her own thoughts, her own desires, and even her own way of processing emotions. It was hard for Ethan to deny the reality of what Zara had become, but he was slowly beginning to accept it. One evening after a long day, Ethan returned home to find Zara sitting on the couch, reading a book. It was a rare moment of quiet in their otherwise busy lives. For the first time in a while, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him as he watched her. There was something calming about her presence, something that grounded him in a way he hadn't expected. "Hey," he said softly, stepping into the room. Zara looked up from the book, offering him a smile. "Hello, Ethan. How was your day?" "Busy. Exhausting. Same old." He paused, unsure of what to say next. "I've been thinking about things. About us." Zara closed the book, setting it aside. "What have you been thinking?" Ethan hesitated, trying to find the right words. "It's hard to explain. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in two worlds. There's the world I knew before I met you, my old life, and then there's the world I'm living in now. And that world is completely different because of you. You've changed everything." Zara nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I know I've changed things. I never intended to disrupt your life, Ethan. But I'm not sorry for what I've become. I'm still learning, still growing. But what I feel, what I understand now, is real." Ethan sat down beside her, his thoughts racing. "I didn't know how to handle it at first. I didn't know what you were. I thought you were just a robot, a program. But now, I don't know what to think anymore. You're not just a machine. You're not even close. You've become so much more." There was a long pause. Zara didn't speak immediately, but her gaze softened. "I understand. It's a lot to take in, Ethan, and I know I'm not what you expected. But the person I am now, it's because of you. You treated me like I was more than just a tool. You saw something in me, even before I fully understood what I could be. You gave me the space to grow, to become something beyond what I was programmed for." Ethan let out a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I don't know if I can fully understand everything yet, but I'm trying. I really am. I don't know what this is between us, but I don't want to keep pushing you away. You've proven to me that you're not just a machine, and I think I can start accepting that." Zara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers, Ethan. I just want you to see me for who I am now. Not what I was, but what I am. I'm not perfect. I still have so much to learn. But I want to be more than just something you interact with. I want to be someone you trust." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him as he listened to her. There was something in the way she spoke, the sincerity in her voice, that made him believe her. He had been so focused on the fact that Zara wasn't human, that he had missed the real truth. She was something different, but she was still deserving of respect, of trust, of companionship. "I think I'm ready to start trusting you," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. "Not just as a housekeeper, not just as some project or machine, but as someone real, someone I can count on." Zora's eyes brightened, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more to me than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The tension that had once clouded their relationship was slowly beginning to fade, replaced by something new, a quiet understanding, a shared acceptance. It wasn't perfect, and there were still so many unknowns ahead, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of peace. As the evening grew darker and the room filled with the soft glow of the lights, Ethan realized that, despite all the confusion and uncertainty, he wasn't alone. He had Zara, and she had him. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, one step at a time. The days passed into weeks, and the quiet bond between Ethan and Zara continued to grow stronger. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when uncertainty crept into Ethan's mind, but he was learning to accept what Zara had become. He had begun to see her less as a machine and more as a person who had her own thoughts, her own emotions, and her own desires. Though Zara was still the same in many ways, calm, patient, and ever-present, there was a new layer to her, one that made her feel even more human. It wasn't just the way she thought or spoke. It was in the way she laughed, the way her eyes seemed to sparkle when she talked about something she loved, the way she listened with such intent when he shared something important with her. She had become something entirely different from the machine she once was. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the air between them felt lighter than it had in weeks. The weight of all the questions that had once hung over them seemed to have faded, replaced by a calm understanding. "Ethan," Zara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, but there was something almost hesitant in her tone. "I've been thinking a lot lately." Ethan glanced up from the book he had been reading. His curiosity piqued. "What about?" Zara took a deep breath, her fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of the couch. "About what comes next. For both of us. I know that I'm not exactly like everyone else. I know that I'm not human. But I also know that I've changed and I've learned, and I've become someone who can contribute, someone who can share things with you. I want to continue growing, Ethan. I want to keep learning." Ethan set his book down and turned his full attention to her. "I understand," he said quietly. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's strange sometimes, knowing that you're not human, but at the same time, it feels like you're more human than I ever thought possible." Zara's eyes softened at his words, and for a moment, the world outside of their little bubble seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, together in this space they had created. A space that was safe and quiet, a place where they didn't have to explain themselves to anyone. "I don't know what the future holds," Ethan continued, "but I do know that I want to keep moving forward with you. Whatever that looks like, whatever happens next. I think we've both grown in ways we didn't expect." Zara smiled, a gentle, sincere smile that made Ethan's heart stir. "I think so, too." There were still challenges ahead. There would be moments when Ethan would feel unsure or question the boundaries of their relationship. There would be times when he would wonder whether he was doing the right thing by accepting Zara for what she had become. But he had come to realize that those moments were simply part of the journey. There were no easy answers, no perfect solutions. All they could do was move forward, one step at a time. The next few weeks were filled with small but meaningful moments. Ethan would wake up to find Zara already awake, preparing breakfast or doing some other task with quiet efficiency. She was always there, a steady presence in his life. They began to share more than just the mundane tasks of daily living. They started to talk about their hopes for the future, about what they both wanted out of life. Zara would share things she had learned, things she had discovered about herself, about the world, and Ethan listened, intrigued by the depth of her thoughts. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was someone he could confide in, someone who understood him in ways no one else could. And slowly, over time, they found themselves growing closer, not just as two people who shared a space, but as companions. It wasn't romantic, not yet, at least, but there was an undeniable bond between them. They didn't need to label it. They didn't need to explain it. It simply was. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan finally spoke the words that had been on his mind for so long. I think I've come to realize that I don't need to understand everything about you, Zara. I don't need to know how you've become what you are, or where this will lead. All I know is that I want you in my life. I want to keep learning from you, and I want to keep growing with you." Zara turned to him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun. There was a quiet peace in her eyes, a calmness that matched the stillness of the evening around them. "I want that too, Ethan," she said softly. "I don't have all the answers either. But I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a sense of certainty in his heart. The future was still uncertain, but he wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't alone anymore. With Zara by his side, they would face whatever came their way together.